Ethnocentrism in psychology is loosely defined as the inability to think outside one's own cultural experience, and a tendency to assume that what happens in our own culture is common to other cultures. Sometimes psychologists draw conclusions from studies focused on one culture or group, and assume it can be generalized to other groups or cultures. This phenomena has been common in research conducted in Western countries like the US and UK, although more so in the past. Generally speaking, there are two forms of ethnocentrism. The first and more brutal form of ethnocentrism is an explicit belief that one's group, social, ethnic or cultural, is more important than others. The softer version of ethnocentrism is the idea that as individuals and groups, we find it hard to think outside of our own cultural experience. So we just unquestioningly assume the way things happen in our own culture is just the way things happen in all other cultures. This means that, in research, psychologists might design research or draw conclusions in a way that makes sense or applies to only their cultural group, but may have little meaning to other cultural groups. This could be because the sample in the study reflects only one culture. It may also be that the question asked, the task given, or the interpretation of the results assumes a particular cultural background. One of the strengths of research into ethnocentrism is that it helps us to understand the mechanisms by which discrimination arises. By understanding the mechanisms of ethnocentrism, we should be more able to address them in order to improve society so that it can become more cohesive. Another strength of research into ethnocentrism is that it enables researchers to be more wary of assuming their culture is superior or the norm, and that there is a danger that their research or tests will be biased. For example, some of the early types of IQ tests have been shown to be biased towards white, middle-class Americans, at the expense of Black Americans. Arguably, there are no weaknesses of research into ethnocentric bias in psychology and science as a whole, since the greater awareness of our own ethnocentric tendencies, whether overt or implicit, can only be a good thing as an individual in society or as a researcher. Moving away from research, ethnocentrism in and of itself does have a weakness. That being that you may not be able to generalize your study's results if your sample only comes from one culture. This is because if your sample is just a group of people from the same culture, it is not representative of other cultures and their behaviours.